Now, Justin, as we transition from this with anything else to kind of bring the two previous executive function, nervous system into self-deception, we both have a couple of things I think we want to talk about here that are super important. But I think the punchline in terms of the upgrade to coaches is coming in more. I get the intention. We totally get where people's hearts are at, as they would say, right? And we've done this too. Justin and I have been fortunate enough to have some incredible mentors and teachers to help us find our own self-deception. And that doesn't ever end. That's why I'll never not have a coach. For me, that's why I'll not have mentors, is because it's so important to be able to have those reflective containers that are safe for the nervous system, beneficial for executive function, but are still clear enough to help us understand the way essentially we bullshit ourselves. We are so good at bullshit. And we don't have time tonight to talk about all of them, but there are some good things to being able to bullshit yourself. There's some that can be fertilizer from amazing things that have grown in this world. But the challenge is everything from like the placebo effect can make everything seem like a good idea and make it seem like everything can work if you feel strongly enough about it. And it can for a little while. They've even done studies where they put some people on different placebo, whether it was medication or situations. They told them that doing certain things would provide certain things to them. And then they revealed to them that it was a placebo, and it still had a significant benefit to their system. That we are super powerful. And so if we don't understand how powerful we are, regardless of the objective truth, and you'll talk a little bit, Justin, about the evidence-based skew that the clinical world has taken that has robbed us of life being uncertain and dynamic and whatever, and far from objective. That those evidence-based things can come in as a support, but now they're coming in and dictating the way that the human interaction, let alone therapy and coaching, should be done. And it's actually limiting us. It was a good course correction for a while, because for a while we got there to be so ambiguous. And so like anybody could grab a microphone and say anything, and all of a sudden they'd have a following and a cult and whatever, and all these different things. So let's talk a little bit about executive function, the nervous system, and self-deception from your perspective. Why does it matter so much for coaches to understand their own self-deception without being cynical towards themselves, and their client's self-deception, the bullshit?
Yeah, self-deception / bullshit, those are a little bit more judgment laden but really it's hard to not put a judgment laden turn to something that you can look back on. Once you realize that that's what you were doing, you're like, that was such bullshit. And just kind of laugh with yourself and enjoy that process. But that comfort and level to it. But when I am talking about executive function and the nervous system, and I say there are things that we do to adapt to live in this world and survive, when we recognize that in some way it is not totally indicative and in line with our values, not the ones that have been predicated to us or given to us or influenced as being the most valuable. When we have kind of created these adaptive processes, it is exactly that. It's an adaptation, not a full embodiment. And that's where I think that the bullshitting process, it gets really set by the wayside a little bit, because there's a lot of successful people I know that bullshit their way through it. And they created some mental functioning, some executive functioning in that process, and then also relational functioning that was really successful for what they wanted to accomplish. While all in that process, they were not fully meeting the need of their nervous system. And so the process of that it is a limiting factor. I see bullshit as a limiting factor because it really will come to a point where it'll hit a precipice and we'll hit somewhat of a crisis for ourselves, whether it's a middle-aged one or maybe it's something that has to do with mental health. And some of that I see on a daily basis that pain.
You're saying it might get to a point where we'll have a mental health crisis?
Well, let's say if you live that long.
Oh, you mean our individual lives? I was like, way to go, Nostradamus. We're in it.
We're in it. No. Yeah, it does get to a point of crisis, and whether it is existential too. Paul talking about existential crises that we experience on a, I mean, gosh, so many on a daily basis of possibility. But the process of that coming up and us not knowing, like, how do I manage this? How do I deal with this? How do I feel this? Like, is because we haven't met some of those needs of our nervous system up to that point.
Hmm.
So it could be childhood. It could be last week I wasn't meeting the needs of my nervous system, and I'm bullshitting myself this week on something. And so that level of ability to recognize where that's at, and honestly, sometimes we really need some help on that because of our own blind spots, as we talk and identify some of our own worldview right now. Some of it, we may look at 10 years from now and say, I was bullshitting around this, but I think I really got this together right there. But it was serving a function at that time. And we can
Hmm.
put that an understanding to it. And if we look at that function without criticism or judgment, we're able to move through that and really find an alignment that is beautiful. And I honestly put that in my own words. Other people put it in their own words of just like aha moments where they just feel so much more grounded, more connected, more relatable, more successful. Some people have just told me in the process, just clients started coming in that process because people are drawn to
Hmm.
those in alignment, right? And that, I mean, you can talk about the manifestation of money and other things in that. Probably we don't need to get to that, but the real purpose of this is not that. When we're not talking about the more that we were talking about at the beginning is really because if it is based on the more, we're not clearing out that bullshit really. And
Hmm.
so I just feel like when we have an like untapped availability to really embody some of the meaning and the value that we have internally, it just manifests as bullshit. So if we have that untapped in some
Yeah.
way, I think that's my most benevolent way of saying it. But there's a lot of people out there that I've met that are maybe not so benevolent how they appear with their bullshit. But this is really, I really find it a good meaning behind it, but it also ultimately is a limiting factor for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a couple of the really important things we want to touch on tonight as we're running out of time, um, is we want to bring compassion, an extraordinary amount of compassion to examining our bullshit. Gratitude for like, wow, I'm actually grateful that my mind talked me into that bullshit at that time, because if it hadn't, I might have totally self-destructed. I might have totally self-destructed. And you mentioned this term, such a critical one, again, coming back to this, and the agility that we need to be able to have the right to change our mind. That's so hard to do today socially, to be allowed to change your mind. So much of your social standing, so much of your connection with your friends has to do with we agree with each other, not we can see each other. We can consider each other. And so a lot of us may realize we've been deceiving ourselves. And one of the risks there is we jump into the next thing, thinking that we're never going to let that happen again. And that's the fodder, that's the cannon fodder that fires us right into the next pile of bullshit. I was raised in a very fundamentalist religion. And when I left, I told my wife, I remember I called her, I was on a road trip, and I said, I'm done. This was a really scary thing to decide. And I said, I feel like I'm stepping out of the matrix. And then something hit me. And I've been studying this stuff for many years at this time. So I'm so grateful that it came out in words because I've thought about it every day since. So I feel like I'm stepping out of the matrix, but I know I'm just going to step into other ones. The person who spends their life trying to prevent bullshit, the person who claims to not have any, is the one that is full of it. And so
And
learning how to go
so
ahead.
on the converse, those that say that they're wise and educated, they're only limiting themselves. They're full of bullshit too.
Yeah.
Is that connotation of I am wise has a hierarchical like stratification that is just, it's bullshit.
Yep. And you and I would rather work with someone who thinks they're somewhere than they're not than someone who thinks they've arrived.
Mm.
Because I think that's the biggest bullshit of all is like I figured it out or I finally it's finally different this time because that adds so much more judgment when like what Claire Graves talked about. He's like we have this innate human desire to get to the next level because we believe it's the answer, only to find out it's not the answer. And as he famously said, we never get to unpack the wagons.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can, we want to teach you how to navigate self-deception, both from an awareness standpoint, because that's so important, where to harness it, because there are places that it can actually be really helpful when you can do it as consciously as possible, and how to be able to navigate it with another client without triggering their nervous system and without adding further detriment to their executive functions. It can be a really tricky, we're talking about it colloquially and playfully tonight and bullshit, whatever. Like this is not how we work through it with our clients. But you know, in this presentation to get your attention. Now I want to touch on something because it's so core to what Justin was talking about in executive function, core beliefs. And you and I were talking about this the other day, that one of the elements that bullshit creates is a correlated belief. You know, a core belief like I believe in abundance, you know, I believe in financial abundance. Well, okay, is it showing up that way? Is your life consistently showing up that way? Because if it's not, simple indication there's some bullshit going on. But it's not necessarily because you're lying to yourself. We've actually found we know cognitively it's impossible to lie to yourself because you know you have all the evidence. Okay, it's not like there's a prosecutor and a defendant and they're trying to hide evidence and manipulate and what you have all of you are the courtroom, but you can bullshit yourself. And this is probably one of the first things that can help all of you and your clients start to navigate this better is understanding the difference between lying and bullshitting. Lying is when you deceive, when you ask me, did I steal that? And I say no, but I actually did. That's a lie. I can't say that to myself because I know that I stole it. Okay? Unless I have a unbelievable level of sociopathy. But even then, that's a disconnect from that part of me, not gotten. So you could still argue that some part of you still knows it's a lie. You just have very little to no cognitive connection, and your reticular activation center operates totally differently in those situations. But the bullshitting is simply a matter of attention. It's, did you steal this? And it's, did you see what happened over there? You know, but we do that in our lives in terms of like, oh my gosh, I'm so worried about my relationship. I don't know if this is going to last. So we put all of our attention on something else. And then we tell ourselves the story that our relationship's so much better because we're not paying attention to it. Or we're not paying attention to things that are still there, but we're just looking at different elements. And that gets really dangerous. That creates Jenga towers for people in their lives where they feel like they're making progress, that they're not making the progress they think they are. Are they making progress? Sure. But if you're not making the progress you think you are, you're setting yourself up for an unmet expectation. And those in the nervous system are violent. Unmet expectations are violent. So here's correlating beliefs. You may believe that you are abundant. I am abundant, but it's not showing up that way. So we know there's bullshit. What's actually happening more often than not is that you, as an example, I'm not saying you personally, but this person, okay, let's make it a little less attacking, okay? This person claims to have a core belief of abundance, financial abundance, but they're not experiencing it. What is more than likely is they actually have a belief that money and status are the most important thing in life. From a vain perspective, you could say. And they are in a group that on the surface presents as we all believe in financial abundance. We all believe in being abundant. And so because status is one of your core beliefs and believing that status is how you get the money, that is your other correlating belief, you adopt and bullshit yourself into believing that you have a core belief of abundance. But you have a core belief of abundance because it gives you status in the group, which you believe is going to give you money, which you somehow manipulate yourself into believing is the same thing as having a core belief of abundance. And yet you don't actually get to experience. Even if it shows up in your bank account, you don't get to feel abundant. Which, going back to the nervous system, is anything you want in life. You don't actually want that thing. You want how you think that thing is going to allow you to feel. You don't want the bigger house. You want what you think having the bigger house will feel like. You don't want to have more sex. You want what you think having more sex will feel like. I'm being dramatic. Of course, we want those things, but we're talking about in the functions, the cognition, the nervous system of your being. We can no longer keep bullshitting the pretend personal development that we're doing versus what we're actually experiencing in those very quiet moments that we feel very alone. Those are the moments we should feel very safe. And just because we got programs and peak states and books that we read that, as Justin said so powerfully tonight, makes it so that we don't notice the loneliness and the lack of safety as often, doesn't mean it isn't still epically powerful. And in the end, it will win if we don't learn how to address it differently.